Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Today we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, The Cosmic Manifestation, Chapter 4, The Process of Creation, Text 5. And I will also be summarizing texts 1 through 5. So I'll give you time to pull it up. Text 5, 2, 4, 5. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jana Jana Shalakaya Chakshulumitam Jena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. I was born in the darkest ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with the torch of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. Shri Chaitanya Manovistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadatit Swapadantikam. When will Srila Rupa Goswami Prabhupada, who is established within this material world, the mission to fulfill the desire of Lord Chaitanya, give me shelter under his lotus feet? Vancha kalpa tarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyavacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. I offer my respectful obeisances unto the Vaishnav devotees of the Lord. They are just like desire trees and can fulfill the desires of everyone, and they are full of compassion for the fallen conditioned souls. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. I offer my respectful obeisances unto Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Lord Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar Pandit, Shri Vas Thakur, and all the devotees of Lord Chaitanya. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I pray that Shri Shri Radha Kalachandji, Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Gurudev use me as an instrument so that their message can flow through me to give me the words to serve the Vaishnavas listening. Today is Tuesday, January 20th, 2023, and as I said, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, The Cosmic Manifestation, Chapter 4, The Process of Creation, Text 5. Please repeat. Rajo Vacha Samichinam Vacho Brahman Sarvagya Tavadnagya Tamo Vishirate Mayam Hare Kata Yata Katam. Please chant. Rajo Vacha Samichinam Vacho Brahman Sarvagyasha Tavanaga Tamo Vishiryate Mayam Hare Kata Yata Katam. Raja Vacha The king said, Samichinam, perfectly right, Vacha, speeches, Brahman, O learned Brahmana, Sarvagyasha, one who knows all, Tava, your, Anagha, without any contamination, Tama, the darkness of ignorance, Vishirete, gradually disappearing, Mayam, unto me, Hare, of the Lord, Katayata, as you are speaking, Katam, topics. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Maharaj Parikshit said, O learned Brahmana, you know everything because you are without material contamination. Therefore, whatever you have spoken to me appears perfectly right. Your speeches are gradually destroying the darkness of my ignorance, for you are narrating the topics of the Lord. Purport. The practical experience of Maharaj Parikshit is disclosed herein, revealing that transcendental topics of the Lord act like injections when received by the sincere devotee from a person who is perfectly uncontaminated by material tinges. In other words, reception of the messages of Srimad Bhagavatam from professional persons heard by a Karmakandiya audience never acts miraculously, as stated here. Devotional hearing of the messages of the Lord is not like hearing ordinary topics. Therefore, the action will be felt by the sincere hearer by experience of the gradual disappearance of ignorance. I'll just read the English translation. Unto those great souls who have implicit faith in both the Lord and the spiritual master, all the imports of Vedic knowledge are automatically revealed. Svetasvatara Upanishad 6:23. When a hungry person is given food to eat, they feel satiation of hunger and pleasure of dining simultaneously. Thus, they do not have to ask whether they have actually been fed or not. The crucial test of hearing Srimad Bhagavatam is that one should get positive enlightenment by such an act. So we'll go back and read texts 1 through 4. Sutta Goswami said, Maharaj Parikshit, the son of Uttara, after hearing the speeches of Sukadev Goswami, which were all about the truth of the self, applied his concentration faithfully upon Lord Krishna. Maharaj Parikshit, as a result of his wholehearted attraction for Lord Krishna, was able to give up all deep-rooted affection for his personal body, his wife, his children, his palace, his animals, like horses and elephants, his treasury house, his friends and relatives, and his undisputed kingdom. O great sages, the great soul Maharaj Parikshit, constantly wrapped in thought of Lord Krishna, knowing well of his imminent death, renounced all sorts of fruitive activities, namely acts of religion, economic development, and sense gratification, and thus fixed himself firmly in his natural love for Krishna, and asked all these questions exactly as you are asking me. Text 5, today's text. Maharaj Parikshit said, O learned Brahmana, you know everything because you are without material contamination. Therefore, whatever you have spoken to me appears perfectly right. Your speeches are gradually destroying the darkness of my ignorance, for you are narrating the topics of the Lord. So, when I was reading these verses, the overarching themes, there's two that stood out to me. One is wholehearted dedication to God, to Krishna, and the other is asking sincere questions of a very learned person. So let's first take a look at this wholehearted attraction. You know, in the verses it says that Maharaj Parikshit was so enthralled and dedicated to Krishna that he's willing to give up everything, right? He's willing to give up his family, his palaces, his, all his riches, even all the things that we think will make us happy. So we have the 4 acts of which religion helps us to understand the world and be successful, right? So we have religion, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation, right? So those 4 things we tend to think of as being successful if we can master these things, right? And we do this because we want to be happy. Right? What brings you happiness? Rasheshvari, what makes you happy? When you're with Krishna, exactly. What about when your mom and dad give you hugs and kisses? Does that make you happy? Yes? So feeling love can make us feel happy, right? Anything else that makes you feel happy? That's right. Right. So in the Bhagavad Gita, it says, if there's no peace, what does there speak of happiness without peace? Right? So having peacefulness. And what does peacefulness mean for you? So peacefulness can be not having unrelenting material desires, right? So trying to build up this economic development, houses, palaces, family, just enough to provide for everyone so everyone's satisfied, right? So he says in this 5 verses we learn, it's like basically a good summary of the entire Vedas, right? It's like, let's give up everything and then inquire from a learned person. And Maharaj Parikshit is, he's at that time, he was like emperor of the world. He had everything, right? And he found out he was going to die in 7 days, and then decides that, well, I've had enough. I'm going to just give up everything and peacefully surrender and turn my attention to 100% to God. In the first purport, Prabhupada says, the whole Vedic adventure is to draw one's attention entirely unto the lotus feet of Lord Krishna without any diversion. So he's making this point that we're talking about, that we really, this is our goal in life, is to find this wholehearted attraction to God, to Krishna specifically. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. By all the Vedas I am to be known. Indeed, I am the compiler of Vedanta. I am the knower of the Vedas. So when we decide to turn ourselves towards Krishna, right, we've been wandering in this cycle of birth and death, trying to gain success and pleasure from economic development, from sense gratification, from trying to achieve what we think is liberation, from being righteous, religious. Krishna says that I'm the one that gives you this ability to remember Krishna, just as long as you have a little spark, right? So we just have to have this little desire of, what is the meaning? Why am I here? There's got to be more to this. And then Krishna will send us these messages and open our hearts up to have these messages, right? So from him comes remembrance. The fact that we forget Krishna is also from him in his form of Maya, right? As his empowered representative is Maya. So from her we forget everything. And also knowledge comes from him. Prabhupada continues to say in the first purport of this chapter, to become a pure devotee of Lord Krishna, 2 things are very much essential. He says that having been born in a family of a devotee, or having the blessings of a bona fide spiritual master. And in the Chaitanya Charitamrita it is said that a fortunate person, by the mercy of the spiritual master and Lord Krishna, achieves the path of devotional service. So on one hand, we may not all be fortunate enough to be born into a family of devotees. Right? So many of us that come to Krishna consciousness come because our families may not have had a set religion or set belief in God, and we realize that there's something more. I personally am very blessed in that sense that I did come from a family of devotees, and have been coming to the temple my whole life. And then I've also been blessed in that I met my bona fide spiritual master, and took shelter of him. So as we progress on this journey, when we have this desire to know who we are and who God is in our relationship to God, then Krishna helps us remember from within, but he also sends a learned person, a spiritual teacher from without, right? So we have both teachers within. We have our teacher within and we have our teacher without. And sometimes we can get very caught up by thinking we know ourselves. Like well, this is my life. I know what I need. Somebody outside of me can't really know what I'm going through. We can have these kinds of thoughts. And on some level, we're right. We do know ourselves better than anyone else. But we also are very good at ignoring the voice. If you know what I'm talking about, that voice, that intuition that we have that guides us, we can be very adept at ignoring it and listening to that voice that's like, oh, let's just, go and relax and have fun and, have that piece of cake or, just indulge in whatever sense gratification that we want to indulge in. And we can do so many mental gymnastics to make it seem like, oh, this is great, this is actually what I'm supposed to be doing because within this is what I was told. But we know that that's not quite right. There's a part of us that will know that. And we need somebody outside of us to tell us, hey, that's not quite right, And we see this whenever we try to learn anything. It's like when I was studying to become a doctor, I didn't just rely on my internal knowledge and be like, well, I know how my body works, so everybody else's body must work the same way, and I can, apply that. I had to study, I had to learn, and then I could better understand certain things about how my body works and how other people's bodies works, and then to treat them and heal them and diagnose them. So I had to go through medical school. Some people think, they can attend Google University and they know just as much, but still that's something that's without, right? That's not something that you just happen to know, just because. It's information that you're gathering from without. So this idea of having a spiritual teacher is extremely important. We see it not just in a spiritual aspect, but also a material aspect, right? Like if I wanted to become really fit and, muscular and trained, I could try to do it on my own, but if I have a trainer, personal trainer that can tell me how I'm doing things, if it's correct, if it's not correct, sometimes you think, oh, this, skipping a day won't hurt, or, I don't want to do that, or like you don't quite push yourself to lift enough weights to make the progress that you want. Your physical trainer, your personal trainer will push you in that way. And then just because someone can teach doesn't mean that they're necessarily a leader, or just even if they have that for themselves, right? I've seen so many people at the gym that are super fit, like they're muscular and they're fit and they're healthy, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have the knowledge then to teach it to others, right? So we need to have both of those qualifications in some ways, that you can see that they're practicing it and they're able to teach it. So when we talk about a spiritual teacher, there's so many things that we can look at in that sense, and I'll come back to that. So I just want to speak a little bit more about freeing ourselves from material desires and attaching ourselves to Krishna. So in the second purport, Prabhupada says, to become liberated means to become free from the illusory attachment for personal bodily coverings and everything connected with the body, namely your spouse, children, all other entanglements. And then a devotee of the Lord never thinks of their own household paraphernalia as their own, but surrenders everything for the service of the Lord. Thereby, living entities under a devotee's care get the opportunity for God realization by management of a devotee master. Okay, so again, this is saying that when we start to turn ourselves towards Krishna, we automatically detach ourselves from our material desires. And it's not like instantaneous. I mean, here I am like 27 years after, taking this process up pretty seriously. I still have plenty of attachments. I'm still waiting for this idea of being free from the illusory attachments of personal bodily coverings, right? Like, I like having my comfortable bed. I like having a comfortable house. I have my living entities that I take care of and try to manage to get them to have some prasadam. They accompany me when I'm chanting my rounds, right? So there is some parts of it, but there's still this attachment that we have that can be very difficult to let go of. Prabhupada goes on to say, attachment for household paraphernalia and Lord Krishna go poorly together. One attachment is the path of darkness, and the other attachment is the path of light. Where there is light, there is no darkness. Where there is darkness, there is no light. But an expert devotee can turn everything to the path of light by an attitude of service to the Lord. They can turn everything to light by dovetailing so-called material assets in the service of the Lord. One who is not trained or is unable to turn everything to the service of the Lord must give up all material connections before they can be fit to hear and chant the glories of the Lord. In other words, one who has seriously heard Srimad Bhagavatam for even one day, like Maharaj Parikshit, from a fit personality like Sukadev Goswami, may be able to lose all affinity for material things. So now we go back to this idea of having guidance from someone outside of us, right? So I have so many material desires, but I also have a spiritual teacher that can help me turn these material desires and these material things that I have in service to God, to Krishna. And it's very important because, again, we can do so many mental gymnastics. Like I mentioned before, that I like to have the latest gadgets, right? And I use my phone for, like you can see I use technology to give class. I use it in so many different ways. And I justify, like, oh, well, I need an Apple phone, iPhone because it's the latest technology and I can do all this stuff. But the truth of the matter is I don't need something so extravagant to accomplish what I do. So it's partly there is a need and that can be used in service, but there's still a part of it that's, my desire and wants, needs, things like that. So we can dovetail things, right? And even better is understanding that what do we actually need and just streamlining our life in that way. But in either way, we need some kind of guidance so that we don't just, justify everything that we're doing and saying, oh, well, this is for this isn't, this helps me in my service to Krishna, to God. So going on in purports 3 to 4, Prabhupada says the three activities of religion, economic development, sense gratification are generally attractive for conditioned souls struggling for existence in the material world. Such regulated activities prescribed in the Vedas are called karmakandiya, conception of life, and householders are generally recommended to follow the rules just to enjoy material prosperity, both in this life and the next. As a great emperor of the world, Maharaj Parikshit had to observe such regulations in the Vedic karmakandiya section. But by his slight association with Sukadev Goswami, he could perfectly understand that Lord Krishna, the absolute personality of Godhead, is everything. So we come back to understanding that Krishna is the end-all and be-all. He is the goal, right? He is what we want to attach ourselves to. He's God. And everything else is kind of to help us do that. So if we are going to have sense gratification, slowly dovetailing that into our service or, attaching ourselves to Krishna for economic development, and even religion, right? Because religion doesn't necessarily connect us to God, right? Therefore, that in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me, right? So he's saying that at the end of the day, it's not about these rules and regulations. It's not about, religion per se, whether it's Hindu or like the Vedas, whether it's Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, right? All these religions, there's so many varieties of it. And he's saying just abandon all of it and surrender unto me. So how do we engage ourselves in this full devotional service and not fall down? Any ideas? Unmotivated and uninterrupted devotional service as stated in the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. Yeah, absolutely. So how do we get ourselves into that place of unmotivated and uninterrupted devotional service? Right, it's following in the footsteps, right, under the guidance of a spiritual teacher. And this point is made in pretty much all the purports of these particular verses. And if we look at the verse itself, that's exactly what Maharaj Pariksha is doing. He's inquiring from a spiritual teacher, a spiritual master. And as I mentioned, we can't do it on our own because we get so caught up in our own desires that it's hard to detangle what is our own material desires, what is our own desire for sense gratification. And then that expands to our family, right? Like what is our desire for their sense gratification and their material desires. And so we have to have something that can help us detangle our desires and wants with actually what will help us progress in our spiritual path. So it's not that on its own our material desires and desiring for sense gratification is bad, right? It's not like it's evil. It's more that it can hinder us on our path, right? So I'm constantly trying to eat healthy and live healthy and, have a certain weight. And when I look at that, it's not that necessarily eating cake is bad. It's just that it may not help me get to my goals. And as a matter of fact, it can actually hinder me. Like it can prevent me from getting to my goals of being fit and healthy. So, we have to have some sort of outside leadership. And we can have gurus in so many different ways, so many different teachers, right? So we can have teachers that are actual spiritual, like they are in charge of our soul and getting us the spiritual liberation and understanding who we are to Krishna. We also have other teachers that may be more advanced than us, and we can take guidance and advice from them. We also have peers, and peers can offer advice as well as accountability, right? And we also have people that we teach, and sometimes we have to rise up to that level to teach, right? I'm sure you've experienced this with your daughter, like you feel like you have to set a better example than if it was just you yourself. That's correct, right? And so, we see ourselves, so we have these different levels of teaching, and I'm sure she teaches you just as much as you teach her, right? And that was one thing as I was teaching in the Gurukul this past year, is that I knew this happens, but when it happens, you're just like in awe of it, how you're there to teach the children, but the students actually teach you so many different things, not necessarily the subject, but they teach you so many different things. They, like I remember learning patience, understanding that I'm just there to guide them, right? Like they have their own knowledge, and I'm there to help them bring that knowledge out to the surface. As another example that I like to tell about how we can learn from any situation. A few years ago, I really got into indoor rock climbing, and I tend to be bold, but I also tend to be very fearful. So there's this one wall that was really high, and it's an automatic. So you harness yourself in, and you climb up, and then you can just like lower yourself down, and it's like this machine, right? And it just slowly, you don't just fall down. it lowers you down. It's the same concept. If you partner climb, they lower you down gently, and they don't just like let you fall down. So I was there one morning, and there was a group of students or kids. It was like the kids' camp, and they were also there in that morning. And the kids would like wait in line and climb up the wall and come right down. Like, they were fearless. These like 6 or 7 year olds were fearless. And I was in line, and I just kept letting the kids go in front of me, because I was just like, I can't let myself fall down. I can climb to the top, but then how am I going to get myself down, right? And this one kid noticed that I was just letting everyone go in front of me, and he's like, well, why don't you climb? And I was like, well, I'm a little afraid. And he goes, yeah, I was afraid first too, but watch me, I'll do it. It's really easy. And like, he goes and climbs, and he's like, are you watching me? I was like, yeah. And then he like, lets himself down. And it was interesting to watch that, and then to be like, oh, you can learn from anyone. In that moment, I could have been like, well, I know more, and what does this kid have to teach me, right? But in that moment, I realized that like, we get these messages from everyone. And it's not necessarily in this particular instance that I could say, oh, Krishna is giving me a message. But I do tend to see everything that happens as a message from Krishna. And in that moment, the message that I got was just trust in the process and surrender and let go. And, when I did that, I had so much fun just falling down. Like, it was a controlled free fall. And I was like, oh, wow. I didn't realize that, that could happen. And that's the same thing when we surrender ourselves to this process of Krishna consciousness, to connecting ourselves to Krishna. It includes surrendering to a spiritual teacher. And that free fall can be so exhilarating and fun. So when we're seeking to release ourselves from this material condition of life, we can learn from a bona fide spiritual master. In the introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada says, Vedic knowledge is not a question of research. Our research work is imperfect because we are researching things with imperfect senses. We have to accept perfect knowledge which comes down, as is stated in Bhagavad Gita, by the parampara disciplic succession. We have to receive knowledge from the proper source in disciplic succession, beginning with the Supreme Spiritual Master, the Lord Himself, and handed down to a succession of spiritual masters. So it's interesting that Prabhupada says it's not a matter of researching. This is not something that we can research, which is such a hot buzzword these days, right? Like, oh, I did the research, and therefore I know more about this topic, whether it's, especially during the pandemic, people just kept talking about do your own research. And, it's like, what does that mean? You're going to the same sources that everyone else is going to. And we can always believe what we want despite the evidence. We can turn the evidence to believe what we want to believe. Like, there was a meme that was going around a while back about the universe, and it was like, this is you, and this is the city, and then like they kept zooming out, like, this is the country that you're in, this is the earth, this is the solar system, this is the universe, and then like as you get further and further out, you're just like a little speck. And half the comments were like, this proves the existence of God. Like, there's something that's so much bigger than us. And half the comments were like, this proves that God does not exist, because the universe is continuing, and we're just this little speck, and therefore there is no God. And so it's like, we can take whatever we want and believe whatever supports our current theories of life anyway. And so when we have a guide that can guide us in this perfect knowledge, and we surrender to this guide, this teacher, we can come to that understanding even faster. In the material sense, this idea of teacher and student, mentor and mentee is very important. when I was taking like business development classes or self-improvement, personal growth classes, every one of them talk about how having mentors and teachers is extremely important in this process. Not because, one of the main reasons they said is that these people have the experience of time and wisdom, and they can impart it to you, right? So they could give you in like a week what they took 20, 30 years to learn, right? So it's like they give you the gift of time. And that's the same thing we see when we learn from a spiritual teacher. They've had many years of experience of studying the scriptures, of studying the world, of putting this together, of learning from their spiritual teachers, and then being able to impart that knowledge, right? So they have that experience that they're able to save you tons of time, right? Like we can liberate ourselves and find our own journey to Krishna, but how many lifetimes will it take us, right? Because again, we get sidetracked, we get caught up in our own material desires. We can even go to the woods, and seclude ourselves and still get distracted, right? So that's what happened in that case. If we look at that story of Maharaj Bharat, King Bharat of India, he renounced everything and he went to the woods, but because he still had this material desire, he became attached to a deer, right? And so in some ways you could say he prematurely gave up everything because he still had desires, which then was reflected with his attachment to the deer. And so, we can often look and see what is the actual right thing for us. Because on some cases, it may not be externally giving up everything. If we still have this strong desire for it, then all we will do is think about it, right? We get kind of like caught up in it. I know when Kartik comes around, one of my big vows is to give up TV. And I swear, like the first week and a half, maybe, it's like, that's all I can think about is like, oh, just turn on the TV. Nobody will know, because it's like you give up something that you're not ready to give up. You're still so attached to it. And then I try not to do this, but it happens every time. And when Karthik is over, I just kind of like overdo the watching of TV again. And then I have to balance myself back out, right? So we can see this, and, it's important that we are able to take that guidance of what we are actually able to give up and not give up in order to progress in our spiritual process, faith. So the key here is approaching a qualified spiritual teacher. And we've discussed this to some extent in the sense of that they're studying from their teachers. They're studying the scriptures. You're seeing that they're living the example of what they're teaching. In the purport of Srimad Bhagavatam 1.5.29, Srila Prabhupada explains, they themselves must be plain and gentle to receive the instructions of such a pure devotee. A pure devotee is a completely surrendered soul unto the personality of Godhead. They know the personality of Godhead as the supreme proprietor and all others as his servitors. And by association of pure devotees only, one can get rid of all sins accumulated by mundane association. A neophyte devotee must faithfully serve the pure devotee, and they should be very obedient and strictly follow the instructions. These are the signs of a devotee who is determined to achieve success even in the existing duration of life. So these are our qualifications to even have a spiritual teacher. Right? We want to inquire submissively, just like in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, just try to learn by approaching a spiritual master, inquire from them submissively, and render service unto them. So this is the idea, is inquiring submissively. It's not blind devotion, it's not blind faith. It's inquiry with this idea of learning. Because we can ask questions and be very patronizing or confrontational with our questions. Like you can tell when someone asks you a question that they're not really interested in the answer. They already think they know the answer, and they ask the question because they want to hear a certain answer. But if we ask a question in a submissive way, we're ready for whatever answer will come our way. It may not be something that we expect. It may be something we do expect. We just don't know. We're open to whatever the answer might be. So the spiritual teacher themselves are qualified, and then we qualify ourselves. And we also understand that we're not giving up everything. We are learning to use everything as service. And that's what Prabhupada said in the purport we read from today, not today's purport, but one of the summary purports, is that a person knows this difference. You know, they're able to shed light on this darkness of what actually will help us and what won't. So I will start here and see if we have any comments, reflections, questions, anything that you want to share. You're welcome. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Exactly. I'm going to repeat it. I'm going to repeat the comment for those listening. So the comment is about the spiritual master within, the Chaita Guru within, and the teacher without. But we have two voices within. We have the voice of wanting sense gratification, and we have the voice of that can actually guide us. So we have those two inner voices. And the comment was that they're kind of like that story of the two dogs, the angry dog or the kind, loving dog, and whichever we feed will grow. And so we have these voices, you know, one's friendly, I guess in some ways they're both friendly, but one will guide us to this path of attaching ourselves to Krishna, and one kind of guides us to, you know, sense gratification. And it's just like the verse in Bhagavad Gita, you know, Krishna says, the mind can be our best friend or our worst enemy. And whichever one we pay attention to is what it'll grow, right? And it's true, we have this inner voice that the intuition, our guide, and I've learned the more I listen to it, that stronger that voice goes. And the more you ignore it, the weaker it is. It's just like any other muscle, right? Like if you don't use you're not exercising regularly, your muscles become weak. But if you exercise regularly, your muscles become strong. So it's the same thing. When we listen to that voice, the stronger that voice gets, and the other voice gets weaker. As you said, feeding one versus the other. So yeah, it's a very important point. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. Mm. Bless you. Yeah. That's super soul. Yeah. It's absolutely correct. So he was saying one of the tricks of getting up early in the morning is you're taught, like actually like whisper to your pillow what time you want to wake up. And really what you're doing is telling, communicating with the super soul within. And then you'll find that you wake up and that is the super soul within. I agree completely. There are times where I'm, to come dress the deities and I'm like stressed out about if I'm actually going to wake up or not so early in the morning. And so, like I tell myself, you have to be up by 4 or you have to be up. And I find inevitably like 5 minutes before the alarm goes off, if I have that mindset, I wake up. Now it's a different story sometimes. When I come to dress the deities, I do get out of bed. But it's a different story sometimes when it's something else. Then I'll wake up at that moment, but then I might fall right back asleep, right? So, yeah, it's a combination of the super soul and and also our highest self, right? That pure devotee self as well. And the more we turn to Krishna and rely on him for even those little things, like waking up, you don't really think about relying on God to be your alarm clock, right? We have alarm clocks, we have phones, we have people. But really, when you rely on him for every little thing, we become the greatest self that we can be, which is our pure servant of Krishna, full of knowledge and bliss, eternal. And so it's that combination. It's both parties, right? Krishna is waking us up, but also our higher self that wants to serve Krishna is waking us up as well. Tamal Krishna Goswami, yeah. It is true. I have actually quoted that in a previous class, and I'm trying to see if I can find the actual text. No, I can't. But yeah, it's from Servant of the Servant. And Prabhupada says to Tamal Krishna Goswami, like, this is the universe and all this. And he's like, and then here is one Tamal Krishna who thinks he's so important, right? So, yeah, it's a really nice pastime. All right, well, we can end here if there are no other questions or comments. Right? Tarantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki. Right.